Hey guys, Henry here, and today we're going to be talking about Survivor Season 40, Winners at War, Episode 12. So last week, Sophie was voted off in a massive blindside orchestrated by Tony. So when they get back to camp, Sarah is seriously pissed. Sarah had been working really closely with Sophie and Tony up to this point, and the fact that Tony didn't consult her or Tony didn't give her a heads up as to what was happening to Sophie really pissed her off. So she has a complete rage at him post-tribal council, feeling like him acting alone basically sunk her game and has put her at the bottom with no one willing to work with her other than him, and she's afraid that she's completely lost all the power that she'd built up so far. Tony tries his best to calm her down, trying to reaffirm his loyalty to her, and he tells her about his idol as well. But she just isn't having any of it. She basically tells him that she's holding a complete grudge on him forever, and if she gets voted out, she will never talk to him again. So yeah, Sarah seems really pissed off by this move. I think she felt really good about her game up until this point. She had a solid thing going with Sophie, and she had a solid thing going with Tony, and she thought maybe this would get her at least to the top 5 and maybe she'd knock them off. But I think she was feeling really good about where she was. And now after this move by Tony, her game is completely blown up. Tony then goes to try to talk to Ben because Ben was on the wrong side of the vote as well. And he tries to mend things with him after just blindsiding him. He tells him about his idol as well in an act of solidarity, just trying to rebuild that trust. But Ben doesn't fully buy in, but he is down to work with Tony if it means he can get Jeremy out. So Ben talks about how Jeremy, he's a jury threat, he's a challenge beast, and those are the reasons why he doesn't want Jeremy around. But I just don't buy it at all. It just seems like he doesn't like Jeremy for some reason at this point. And Jeremy in his confessionals says that Ben just isn't talking to him. He's just cutting off their conversation. And this beef is just so funny. Like, Ben's acting like it's some strategic play, but clearly there's something personal going on here. I think this is actually a very bad move on Ben's part. You can't just be shutting people out like that and not talking to them and not strategizing with them. You need to be open to talk to everyone, even your enemies, even if it's just for information or even to essentially, befriend them or lie to them and then make them feel comfortable and then blindside them. You need to have a dialogue with these people. Otherwise, literally, you're just both standing on opposite sides. You know that you're going to vote against each other and you have no cover, really. Anyway, the next day, Tony knows he might be in some trouble and he's got a lot of heat on his back. So he sets up his new spy nest, which it's not a spy shack in the bush and it's not a spy bunker in the ground, but it's up in the trees. But it doesn't really come into play the rest of the episode. So I'll be interested to see if he actually uses this nest going forward in the season. So now we go to Kim, and she tells us that she sees Sarah and Tony as a very big threat because they're quite tight. She wants to split them up, but she feels like she's got a better relationship with Sarah, and so she wants to start making plans to get rid of Tony. She talks to Denise, she talks to Ben, she talks to Michelle, and she talks to Nick, and they all seem to be on board with whacking Tony next. We then go to the Edge of Extinction for our mandatory 10 minutes of Edge of Extinction action, and there's a fire token challenge. It's another marathon challenge where they need to pick up one coconut at a time from the other side of the island and bring 20 back to the shelter. It was very similar to the log challenge earlier this season, and it's just pure endurance. And the first 6 people to bring back those 20 coconuts earn 2 fire tokens. Natalie, who's an absolute machine, wins the challenge and finishes first. So Sophie's in second, then Yul and Tyson and Pav come in a joint 4th, and there's one more spot left, and there's a battle between Wendell and Danny, but Wendell manages to edge her out. And after all this, we see Boss and Rob continuing to push through and finish the challenge, even though there was no reward left and even though he had suffered an injury. Honestly, it's pretty inspirational just to see this. I feel like they just show you a bit of Edge of Extinction just to inspire you a little bit, because the people that are there are just giving it their all. And even this small act from Boss and Rob, it just shows us how much he cares about this game and how badly he wants to win and how badly he wants to really just embody what it means to be Survivor. So we go back to camp, and it seems like a new alliance is forming between Denise, Kim, Nick, and Michelle. And there's a bit of talk about this is their final 4, and the low-key people want to stick together. Meanwhile, the other 4 people are Sarah and Tony, who are bickering, and Ben and Jeremy, who just aren't talking. The hunt for an idol begins as well. Everyone goes out to look for it, and Ben ends up finding it, with Tony right there. He initially tries to hide it from Tony, but Tony completely calls him out because he's literally just standing there, and he finds the idol and tries to shove it in his pants. It's pretty funny. It really complicates their relationship. They now both know they each have an idol, but they clearly don't quite trust each other. Ben not quite trusting Tony because he obviously tried to hide it from him. And now Tony, seeing Ben trying to hide it from him, knows that Ben doesn't completely trust him, and now he's questioning his trust in Ben. So it's really interesting stuff. And watching Ben do stuff like this, it just shows me he's not playing a good game. He has to be more aware of this sort of stuff and how his actions are perceived by the other players around him. He should have really quickly realized Tony would have seen him hide it, and Tony would have found out anyway. You might as well use this as an act of trust building. But no, he doesn't do that, and instead, now him and Tony are a little bit rocky. We then go to the challenge, and it's just a challenge where they need to keep one hand in the air for as long as they can, and there's immunity up for grabs for the last man and the last woman standing. Jeremy, Ben, and Sarah drop out fairly early, and with Tony and Nick left for the men, Nick offers Tony a fire token for him to drop out. But of course, Tony doesn't take it, saying he wants to go for 3 in a row. Jeff comes out at the 15-minute mark and offers up peanut butter and cookies, and Kim and Michelle immediately drop out and take the cookies, leaving Denise to win for the women. And then Nick asks Tony if he'll give him a fire token if he drops out, and Tony accepts it immediately. So in the end, Tony and Denise win immunity and 2 fire tokens, with Tony giving one to Nick. When we get back to camp, Kim is absolutely fuming because her plan to get Tony out has to wait, and they have to change their course of action. So Kim, Denise, Michelle, and Nick get in a group and discuss getting Jeremy out. Ben tags along as well, and he obviously loves the idea of getting Jeremy out. Nick also says something interesting. He says he wants to prove his loyalty to Ben and is willing to vote Jeremy out as well. But Michelle has been with Jeremy at the bottom since the merge, and she tells Kim that she isn't 100% happy with voting out Jeremy at this point, but I guess it is what it is. Ben goes and tells Tony that the vote is for Jeremy, and he also tells him that Kim was leading the charge to blindside Tony initially, and that because they won't be able to do it at this tribal, they'll be doing it at next tribal if he doesn't win immunity. Tony, wanting confirmation, he goes to ask Nick about it, and Nick says that Tony's name wasn't brought up at all. But he can't keep a straight face and is just fumbling around for his words, and it's so obvious that he's lying to Tony. A complete polar opposite to Michelle, who last week was cool as a cucumber when Tony asked about the fire tokens and she told him about some BS advantage. We then see Tony and Sarah discussing what's happening, what the situation is. They see this alliance forming with Kim, Denise, Michelle, and Nick. That's leaving them, Jeremy, and Ben. And they're worried that if the vote goes Jeremy's way, that they'll end up being the 3 to 4 and at the bottom. But they're also worried that if they change the vote to someone else, it just won't sit well with Ben, because Ben doesn't want to work with Jeremy going forward, and Ben just wants to get him out as soon as possible. Tony goes to tell Ben and tries to convince him to vote for Kim instead of Jeremy, even offering him a fire token. But Ben is stubborn as always and is just set on voting out Jeremy. He doesn't buy that Nick is going against Tony, and it's just so clear this guy has no clue, because Nick has gone straight to Kim and told them about Ben telling Tony about their plan, and they regret even telling Ben about the initial Tony vote. So he just has no clue what is going on with the other guys. He's so out of the loop. And honestly, Ben, he's just looking like a goat. He's not winning this, even if he gets to the end. We then see Michelle talk to Jeremy, and she tells him about her 50-50 advantage. It seems like she's trying to do some jury management at the moment. If Jeremy ends up using the 50-50 advantage and losing, she's tried, she helped him out, and Jeremy will probably vote for her if she's at the end. But if Kim goes out, she's at least voted in line with Kim and not gone against Kim. And we then go and see Jeremy talk to Tony, and Tony tells him that Jeremy is going to be the vote and that he wants to go and get Kim instead, but Ben isn't budging. So that leads Jeremy to go to talk to Ben about maybe changing his vote from him to Kim. But it's just basically a pointless conversation. Ben is just not having anything from Jeremy. So just before Tribal Council, Michelle gives the advantage to Jeremy, and it seems like he intends to play it. So what happens at Tribal really is up in the air. It literally is 50-50. When we get to Tribal Council, there's whispering again. And like I said in some of my earlier videos, I expected this to happen most weeks because it just feels like these guys are not going to give up. If they think the vote is on them, they're going to try to scheme if they can. If there's an opportunity in front of them to talk and make a new plan at Tribal, they're going to do it. It seems like at Tribal, Tony is trying to tip things towards Kim and trying to get Ben and Nick on side with him and Jeremy. Meanwhile, Kim gets nervous that she's going to be the vote and she goes to Jeremy to broker a new deal, potentially to vote Sarah out. Sarah gets antsy and wants Tony to play his idol for her, but after the vote, Tony asks Sarah if she feels okay and if she feels comfortable because he's willing to play the idol for her. But she tells him, it's cool, you don't need to, she feels comfortable. Jeremy then reaches into his pocket, about to play his 50-50, but then decides against it. The votes are read out, and Kim is the one that is sent to the edge with 5 votes, and 3 to Jeremy. We know that Michelle and Kim voted for Jeremy, and I assume Denise was the third, as she and Jeremy had an extremely snappy interaction right before the votes, with Jeremy using a bit of a threatening tone. So I think that means that Nick and Ben flipped and voted for Kim. It's really interesting because I feel like Michelle and Nick are in sort of the same position, that middle level. Not really on the bottom, not really on the top, not calling the shots, but sort of the swing vote. But Michelle has done better to not completely just blindside people, while Nick just seems to flip and flop and just go along for the ride. Michelle's moves are more deliberate and have a bit more meaning. I like the way she's playing the game. Meanwhile, Nick, he also seems like a bit of a goat. Again, Tony is the MVP of this episode. Kim tries to go against him and he gets her out. He's preserved his idol that he found last week. He's proved himself loyal to Sarah. The only issue is that people now know he's got an idol. They now know that him and Sarah are really tight and will probably try and split them up. And they now know that he's been making mega moves and his resume is looking juicy. I think Tony needs to keep winning those challenges. He needs to keep finding immunity idols if they go back into circulation. I think that he is probably a pretty big target, and as soon as he's vulnerable, people will be keen to get him out. I'm rooting for Tony. He's so entertaining, and I can't wait to see what he pulls off next episode. This episode itself was extremely entertaining. I had no clue where the vote was going to end up. And honestly, I was very surprised that Jeremy felt comfortable enough not to play the 50-50 advantage. After seeing Sophie go home last week with an idol in her pocket, it seems ludicrous to hold on to that advantage. You might as well just flip it. But he obviously knew something that we didn't. Thank you guys for watching this video. Please be sure to hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. Let me know what you thought of this episode in the comment section down below. I would not have thought Kim would be voted out going into this episode. It's a complete shock. Thank you guys again, and I'll catch you guys next time.